Okay, howdy all. This is Mr. Brown, and I'm putting this video out there today. It's mostly for my year 13s, but I'm just making it out there anyone else who may be studying the IB and might get some value out of this. But I'll leave that one for you. It's mostly for my year 13s. We're studying the Great Gatsby, and they know we're studying it mostly in preparation for paper two. And this is for IB English A paper 2, and they know all about that. So we're going to jump in, and we're not going to get too excited with a long introduction. I'd say this is generated through AI, and I encourage my students to use AI as a study tool to help them, but sometimes they need a bit of direction how to do that. So what I've done today is this is a revision commentary of the Great Gatsby chapter 1, and what I'm trying to do is model for my students and show them how to bring all of IB English A's elements together and to talk about this text at a very sophisticated level. It becomes complex, but that's what we're supposed to be doing in IB English A. We are trying to become sophisticated and to study these texts at a higher level than as a simple meaning. We're trying to bring together the areas of exploration, and they should be obvious as we go through. We're looking at readers, writers, and texts, and how we get meaning out of this text, what the writer intended in this text, and what this text can mean in many ways as we read it. We're also trying to put it in its time and place, situating this text in the Roaring Twenties, America, and also in the Modernist era. That's going to be important when we start to look at intertextuality, which is the third area of exploration. Will just be a start on intertextuality. Today, we're not going to go into it too much, but as we go, we'll really be comparing the Great Gatsby with our other texts, which could be Persepolis, could be A Doll's House, could work really well with Chronicle of a Death Foretold. We'd probably really focus on that, comparing Great Gatsby with the Chronicle. But we'll come to that in time. We're also going to be looking at the fields of inquiry, because the IB likes to situate texts more than just a single textual unit into these broader social contexts, so they become something a lot more than that. They speak to these different areas of life, and we know Great Gatsby already starting to show us a lot about culture and community and beliefs and values and power and politics, situated in its time, and it said things over time and even speaks to today's time, which is important. So those are the fields that really are interesting at the moment. And we're also, as I've been pushing, always looking at the IB concepts as key frames to look at. And hopefully this is going to be a big focus this morning. Hopefully it makes a lot of sense. So that's my little introduction. So we all know where we're at, and we want to start to revise the Great Gatsby. We read through the first few chapters, and we're going to revise these, looking at these key elements so that we can become a little bit more sophisticated when we talk about, when we write about the Great Gatsby. Okay, so without too much further ado, we're going to jump in. We're going to look at this commentary today. Okay, so again, I used ChatGPT to help me generate this with all those instructions. I wanted to bring all these things together and show you how to do it. So chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby opens the novel in a way that's unmistakably modernist. We talked about modernism as being that period around the early 1900s. We could go into this a lot more, but that's not for this video. It's a time that is fragmented, subjective, and rather uncertain. Big changes in the world at this time, and they should, hopefully, my students are well aware of that. Otherwise, go back and look at your notes. Through Nick Carraway's narration, Fitzgerald frames the entire text in terms of perspective, and here we already meet one of the IB's key concepts, and this is key, perspective. It starts the whole novel off in a very modernist way with a frame narrator who is giving us a story of him telling a story, and he's telling the story from his perspective, and his perspective is unique, but it's also framed and constructed exactly how he wants you to get his story. Okay, so Nick insists he is inclined to reserve all judgments. He makes a big comment about how people trust him because he doesn't give judgments, and then people tell him their stories, so he's an observer from the middle, telling everyone stories, and he doesn't make judgments. He's just giving you a story. But that's very ironic. He almost immediately begins to judge, and he describing Tom's cruel body, and he very much is showing you Tom as this moronic, physical, horrible being, or Daisy's voice as an arrangement of notes, and she becomes the siren who is just beautiful and lures men to their doom. And then he goes on to judge and tells us more, basically sets up the whole story as, I went east. I had terrible experiences with these horrible people. I came back. I wanted the world to be moral. So this frame narrator sets up from the very beginning how he wants us to read the story. And he tells us Gatsby's the one man of hope. In the beginning, he wasn't sure about him, but by the end, he's the one who was worth redeeming out of the whole story. So this frame narrator sets you up right from the start, telling you how to read the story, and very ironically says, I don't judge, but then he does judge all the way along. This contradiction highlights modernism's central question. Can we ever access truth, or is everything filtered through representation? This connects directly with the area of exploration, readers, writers, and text, because Fitzgerald reminds us that all stories are mediated by perspective. That's very TOK, and if you want to be a big-time English AIB player, you should be bringing in some of these TOK ideas. How do we know what we know? Well, everything we know from this text is framed through the perspective of Nick Carraway. At the same time, Fitzgerald anchors the text in its time and space, America in the 1920s, and it's very important that everything we're saying, we're aware of the perspective of time and space. And yes, this story has been told and retold over 100 years, but it speaks mostly to its time, and everything that we can say about it, so much has been said over time about the American dream, etc. These are through different filters over time. We want to try and bring it back to its time. Yes, we can say things that have developed over time, but very important that we understand how it fits into its time. And he's giving us a representation of his time, and he shows it as a very divided time. The divide between East Egg and West Egg symbolizes more than geography. It is America's divided identity, and that's very important. A lot of students will want to tell me about this is the American national identity and give me one narrative, or this is the American dream and give me one narrative. But what Gatsby clearly shows us, and what much literature absolutely shows us, is that there is no one identity. Things are divided, and it's very important that when we talk about it, we give the different perspectives. Nick tells us that East Egg is home to the white palaces of fashionable East Egg, symbols of inherited wealth and aristocracy. So it's this representation and this description is loaded with connotation. White, palaces, fashionable, even the word East. It's all very loaded. We talked a bit about it in class, and something that should be obvious. But it's almost an allusion as well to the old aristocracies of Europe. While West Egg is home to the less fashionable, the newly rich like Gatsby. On the surface, the eggs look identical, but socially they are worlds apart. So this is a key part to the story. This is the representation of America. If you're an outsider looking at this dream America of wealth and ambition and the good life, the dream, it all looks very much the same. To anyone on the outside who read through it quickly, there's a mansion on the east, there's a mansion on the west. But Gatsby and Fitzgerald takes us behind that to show us this identity is divided and there is conflict behind this. And if we look from the view of a later character in the story like George Wilson, he probably looks at them all and has a very different perspective to Nick. Nick is privileged in that he understands the finer points of wealth and the American identity. To someone like George Wilson, they might all appear as rather horrible. But even still, he has to treat them slightly differently. And he knows that. This is the value of studying literature. We are getting behind the facades and we're really understanding the identities, the representations, the perspectives. Fitzgerald is exploring the field of inquiry, culture, identity, and community, and that should all be rather obvious, asking who belongs, who is excluded, and how invisible borders define belonging. So far, if I'm giving a direct commentary, it should be obvious we're looking at this story gives us a key perspectives on the ideas of identity, or the concept of identity, the culture of America, the identity of America, the communities that make up America of the 1920s, fitting it within its time and place, showing us different perspectives, showing us different representations, and showing us the myths, breaking them down to show us fragmentation behind it, showing us the big conflicts. It's really quite a complex, but that's what makes it a powerful story. Uh, Inside the Buchanan's mansion, we see culture and power at play, and some beautiful descriptions in the first chapter. Really, like they're almost allusions to show you the rich culture and the absolute power that they have. And it comes in different forms, from the physical power of Tom to the economic power of the Buchanans and the Buchanan name, to the cultural power of these richly decorated and beautiful surroundings they have. Daisy is reduced to her voice, however, and Nick describes her as an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. And I talked with my class about the about character archetypes, and how Daisy is representing here a kind of power in the seductress that she represents. She's the siren, and then she comes down to her voice, and she becomes the golden girl who attracts people, and that's what gives her power in this time, and that's what gives her gender meaning at this time. We'll go into that more. She becomes a performance rather than a full self, showing how gender is constructed through representation. Okay, so we talked about Daisy, how there are moments when that representation, that act falls down, and she's no longer playing the pretty, happy, golden girl all the time. We can see it's very clearly an act, but she gets power by playing that role, and she has to uphold it to keep the power. Tom, in contrast, asserts his authority through pseudo-scientific racism, recommending a book called The Rise of the Colored Empires. He gets a lot of his power from his name, his inheritance, his race, very clearly at the time. We'll go into that. But also his physical strength, and a lot of it comes down to genealogy and his physical power. His claim that civilization will collapse without white dominance exposes the prejudice beneath the glamour of the jazz age. These moments connect to the field of inquiry, beliefs, values, and education. Okay, telling us the beliefs of the time, the values of the time, rather racist for some from some perspectives, backwards. People are being educated in this, and their ideals are being formed by their experiences. And we can see all this through Tom's beliefs. However baseless, they shape the way others are represented, and some are silenced. We can obviously go much deeper into this, but quick commentary. Fitzgerald compresses these cultural conflicts into symbolic images, and we talked about modernism in class and how these symbols are very powerful, and there's just so much symbolism on every page. At the close of the chapter, Gatsby is finally introduced, not in person, but in silhouette, reaching out towards a single green light, minute and far away, and very ambiguous symbolism. But that's key for the modernists. This light already symbolizes transformation, the longing for reinvention. We're going to find out as we read on. The promise of the American dream. So he's been striving to be part of this world, and he still feels like he's not. He's still reaching for that green light. Yet, because it is far away, it also signals exclusion, reminding us that desire and attainment may never fully align. So that's one of the big key themes, and we're going to try and treat it really sophisticatedly, looking at the American dream and Gatsby as a character who wants it. And possibly Nick parallels that as well, a character who wants to be part of the dream and the problems of never fully fitting in. Something we'll talk about a lot in class. Even the eggs themselves, identical in contour, are symbolic paradoxes, appearances of sameness that mark deep cultural division. Very interesting. We talked about those representations being very similar, but being fractured behind, and we'll have to talk more about that. It's another theme that's very big in this, but also modernist literature, the idea of the beautiful facade, not matching the reality. If we zoom out, chapter one is not just exposition, but a meditation on global issues. Fitzgerald critiques belief in progress and the dream. Okay, so remember in class we talked about modernism, a time where we are marching on in progress towards civilization, towards a bright, modern, beautiful future, and that starts to fall into disbelief, especially after we see what happened in World War One, and this story is set straight after World War One, and it's going to be completely destroyed after World War Two. So we are in this time of alienation and disbelief from this message of progress and the dream of America going on towards absolute abundance and living the myth that you can have it all gets shattered as we go towards the economic depression of the Great Crash and World War II. And it's obviously interesting stories to come out of all of that, but that's where we're at. And exposes tension in culture as America transforms and interrogates the unequal representation of women, immigrants, and racial others. So, this story might seem to paint over some of these things, but they're actually really there and they're present. And the treatment of the women in the story and the representation of women in the story, some great quotations, probably even as early as chapter one, with Daisy saying her daughter should be a pretty fool, and Tom's treatment of not only his wife and his mistress later in chapter 2 show us how women are treated and how immigrants are thought of. We get that coming up maybe more in chapters 2 and 3. Racial others, and there's definitely racial hints in there, which we will talk about in later chapters. And he shows how power and politics structure belonging both within families like the Buchanans and across American society. The purpose of the chapter then is not simply to introduce characters, but to immerse us in a modernist world of contradictions by presenting Nick as both insider and outsider, by symbolizing America through divided landscapes, and by foregrounding questions of class, gender, and race. Fitzgerald sets up a narrative where the American dream is both inspiring and deeply flawed. For IB English A students, it is vital to see how the concepts of identity, culture, representation, perspective, and transformation operate not only as themes, but as frameworks through which the novel makes meaning. So that, by way of a summary of chapter one, was very quick, but by way of a commentary that brings together the frames and the elements of IB English A, I think works to help you to see how do we analyze using the concepts, how do we analyze keeping in mind the fields of inquiry and the areas of exploration. Hopefully, as we do this more and more, you're going to see how to do that, and you're going to be able to talk about this text within the frames of IB English A at a very sophisticated, complex level, and then be able to bring in other texts and talk about them together. And that's where the IB wants us to get to, I believe. We're going to keep doing this and trying to build on that. So for now, that's all. We'll be back very soon. We'll look at chapter 2 and continue our journey as we go. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much.